RWBY, Volume 4. The one with all the slapping. The volume started airing on the Rooster Teeth site on October 22nd, 2016, and concluded on February 4th, 2017. Within that runtime of 5 months, we were given 12 episodes, totaling up to 3 hours and 32 minutes. Included for the volume was a character short and 8 World of Remnants. 13 new important characters were introduced. Salem, Tyrion, Hazel Watts, Ilya, Fennec, Corsic, Jacques, Whitley, Klein, Gira, Kali, and Oscar, bringing the total number of important recurring characters to 34. Let's start this review with the thing that most viewers are going to notice first. They aren't bad! Ren, Nora, and Jean are especially nice, but I wouldn't say any of the new designs are annoying to look at, with the exception of Yang, since she's been put in green rather than brown. I personally feel they tend to look over-designed though. There's a new obsession with belts that's almost comedic. Yang's got a belt on her scarf, and Ruby's got 2 belts on one shoe and 5 on the other. It's as if Rooster Teeth decided more belts meant it looked better. I'm also mighty tired of seeing boob windows all over the place. Ruby, Weiss, Blake, Yang, Nora, Emerald, Kali, Glinda, and Salem all have these tit windows. Of the 12 still alive recurring female characters, 9 of them have boob windows. It's ridiculous, and I wouldn't have a problem with it if it wasn't so common and overused within the show. If you want some cleavage, just have the characters wear low-cut shirts. And take a moment to realize you don't always need to see some cleavage, too. Another problem I have is how disconnected Team RWBY look next to each other. They look fine individually, but don't really look like they belong together. This fits the separated theme of the volume, but wouldn't it be nice to see aspects of their friends within their design? Previously, they were designed to have accent colors corresponding with their team. Ruby has a lot of black in her outfit and plenty of silver. Weiss has a good amount of black and red. Blake has a ton of white in her outfit. Unfortunately, Yang's always felt kinda disconnected from the others, as with the exception of Blake's eyes, no one has any yellow on them. While they still have some colors corresponding with their friends on them, each character also has a lot more color on them in general. It makes them feel individual, rather than like a team meant to complement each other visually. Also, I gotta ask, why did they even get new outfits? It's an easy way to denote growth, but beyond that it feels pointless. They don't use these new designs for anything. As of writing this review, they only have 1 figure, some folders, and 5 shirts with the new designs. But they've got a backpack, socks, 5 new shirts, some ugly pop vinyls, a beautiful new figure, a 2018 calendar, a holiday ornament, collectible trading cards, and plushies that use the old designs. And all of these came out during or after Volume 4. Not to mention, RWBY Chibi still uses the old outfits, as does their new board game. It's just like, why give them new outfits if you're not going to use them? A minor nitpick I have is that Weiss's outfit just does not look viable for combat. To be fair, that works well with what she's doing in this volume. She's not fighting monsters, and so it makes sense she's not combat ready during her stay at the Schnee Manor. However, she will be returning to the battlefield, and as it is now, she just doesn't look prepared for that. Her skirt is one of the shortest in the show, and her dress looks like it'd rip if she stretched too hard. I hope she gets an upgraded outfit, similar to how Yang did, to better suit her returning to a combat-oriented lifestyle. Before I saw the volume, I would have said that I thought the show was called RWBY, not RWBY. But after seeing Volume 4, I now lament that this is the most RWBY got to do this volume. I had been disappointed at how little of the cast we had gotten to see in this short, but honestly the whole thing's really nice. It looks gorgeous and has a great soundtrack. The action's snappy and fun, with the only problem with it being that this is the best fight we got for the volume. It establishes a darker tone for the show, which is fine, except that it feels like the writers don't know how to balance that dark with RWBY's lighter moments. The short also establishes a lot that ultimately hasn't mattered. It introduces the Berenjil Grimm, but never uses it in the volume. Well, no, actually it does have an appearance. Right here. Did you see it? Cause I definitely didn't when I first watched that scene. It's just odd that they keep introducing Grimm, but never using them, opting instead to have our heroes blast through hordes of Ursa and Beowulfs. This whole thing with Ruby's cape has also been totally ignored. Does this do something? Does it mean something? It hasn't even appeared in the show proper, so why is it here? It's also quite distracting that this short has way more elaborate lighting effects than the actual show. Shading's consistent and there's actually shine on things like hair and Ruby's brooch, but these things are missing from the volume. It makes the short not only look better by comparison, but it feels like it was animated in a totally different engine. This short is beautiful and fun to watch, ultimately making it one of the best parts of Volume 4. However, the same can't be said for the next subject of discussion. It's boring! It's 90% people just standing around in the wind. What little action it does have is slow and uninteresting. It's also amazing just how much they fucking spoil in it. Weiss's family, spoiled. Blake hangs out with Sun, spoiled. Blake's family, spoiled. Albane brothers, spoiled. Tyrion attacks Ruby, spoiled. Weiss ends up practicing her summoning, spoiled! RT's habit of revealing important characters and plotlines in their openings is nothing new, but I hope it's something they stop doing soon. And on top of all of this, Let's Just Live sucks. Side note, music is subjective, not everyone's gonna like the same music, this is just my opinion. Casey mumbles her way through the uninspired lyrics, making it hard to understand and annoying to listen to. Its tone is so out of nowhere, too. The character short established a darker tone for Ruby, but this opening feels like it belongs in front of some slice of life show. It's a boring waste of 1 minute 20 seconds every episode. This is definitely the best Ruby's ever looked. Every volume looks better than the last, and this is no exception. The characters actually have the ability to interact with the world around them and no longer look flatly shaded. This show is far from perfect, but the animation quality really holds up. For the most part. About halfway through the volume, it's as if they forgot to add the shadows to the characters. Everything became flat and boringly lit for seemingly no reason. When the show can look this good, why would you choose to have so much of it look like this or this? The lighting is no more distracting than whenever the color white is on screen. For some reason, they never want to add shading to white. Nora's shirt is one big unshaded mass, as are Ren's pants. This is most egregious during Weiss's scenes, as the pale look of the Schnee Manor never seems to have any depth. This is so confusing too. You'd think white would show off the shadows the best, but for some reason, it's just immune to depth. The biggest problem I have with the animation is the way weapons are animated. They all look gorgeous, but they also have no weight. This isn't an issue for things like Martinaster and other small weapons, but Crescent Rose and Magenhild suffer a lot from this. They're heavy weapons. They're meant to make a big impact at the cost of having to be swung slowly. They feel like plastic toys in the volume, though. Having a wide variety of different weapons offers many different fighting styles for us to see, but when every weapon feels weightless, that variety is lost. Adding weight to the characters' weapons is what I feel RT should work on the most when it comes to animation. Now, Volume 4 has a lot of character arcs to follow. Let's see how those turned out. There isn't one. No, but seriously, Ruby does nothing of importance throughout the volume. It feels like all she does is make quips, pose a lot, and gets to have the final blow on most of the fights. She never grows or develops or even learns anything, despite the fact that Team Ranger is in almost every episode. She's only missing from 2 episodes this volume, but it feels like she's never there. We're briefly given hints of a potential story for her, but they're never followed up on. Sometimes she looks kinda sad or contemplative, but we never do anything with that. Something could have happened with her nightmares, but those were dropped after 1 episode that was overshadowed with Jean. At the end of Volume 3, we learned that she's got these special silver eyes, but they've also been forgotten except as a convenient excuse for the villains to go after her. She doesn't try to figure out how they work, or tries to see if she can activate them, or try to study them. They're not even brought up in conversation. Anything comedic Ruby does just grates on my nerves, and her phoned-in voice makes all her serious stuff impossible to take seriously. Her obsession with weapons has been completely dropped, and her social awkwardness has been just as forgotten. Not only is she a non-entity during this volume, she's actively regressed as a character. Half of the quirks that made her unique have been pushed aside, turning her from an awkward, gun-loving wannabe hero with a flair for the overdramatic into the embodiment of innocence who doesn't seem to understand how to actually be funny. During the commentary on the DVD for this volume, all anyone had to say about Ruby was that she's naive and innocent, but that's not enough. She needs to become an active member of the plot. As it is now, things just happen to Ruby without her input. She just happened to be in the store and attacked by Torchwick. She just happened to be the niece of one of Ozpin's companions. She just happened to get into the same school as Yang. She just happened to get partnered up with Weiss and the others. She just happened to be their team leader. She just happened to bump into Penny near the CCT, where she then just happened to be in the middle of the road to get saved by her. She just happens to find Cinder at the dance. She just happened to fall down a hole that led to Torchwick's secret base in Mountain Glen. She just happened to encounter Mercury when he should have been hiding. She just happened to be saved from Torchwick by a giant griffin. She just happened to be too late to help Pyrrha, leading to her eyes going crazy, not by her choice. She just happened to be the special snowflake for Tyrion to attack. Ruby needs to actually start doing things on her own accord and actually start affecting the plot, because this is a ridiculous protagonist otherwise. Of Team Ruby, Weiss's arc is the best. We come back to her regularly, and every scene is important and fun. Something happens in every Weiss scene, whether it's the party problems, or getting hit by Jacques, or even just establishing characters. Something happens every time we see Weiss. It never felt like a Weiss scene was unnecessary. We're always either developing Weiss or her family, her relationships, or the world around her, and it's done in a way that feels natural to the conversations and plot. The biggest problem is that she suddenly became good at summoning seemingly overnight. It's a shame we didn't get to see her train to get better at it. Growth means nothing if we don't see the struggles it took to get there. Her arc also lacks a real climax. One could argue it's her summoning armor guy, but since we didn't get to see her work on that, there was no build-up. Weiss's arc kind of just ends, leaving the viewer feeling like there should have been more. Weiss's family also flops a bit in terms of execution. Whitley's villain twist was wildly unsuccessful, with seemingly everyone figuring out he's a villain from his first appearance. If you wanted it to be a surprise, then Weiss shouldn't have been so distrusting of him in their first scene, and he shouldn't have been stapled to Jacques throughout the party. And her mom isn't done well at all. I actually forgot she's not dead during the original run of the volume, because she's never seen and only mentioned once. You can't just assume the lack of her presence should mean something. To quote Miles from the commentary, "We never see Weiss's mom. I wonder why?" Yeah, we do. We don't know if this is a normal thing for Weiss to see so little of her, or if the writers just never thought of a way of including her in the volume. If her absence is supposed to mean something to Weiss, then we need to be told that, either through dialogue or the character performance. The fact that Weiss has gone up like 2 bra sizes is pretty distracting. Guess it was just no fun having flat-chested girls in the show, too. That being said, Weiss's scenes are tons of fun to watch, and her arc, while lacking a real conclusion, is one of the better aspects of the volume. Unlike... Blake's preachy, overdramatic edgelord shtick became annoying almost immediately. I get the feeling it was supposed to be a starts off cold and distant but warms up to sun by the end of the volume, but it didn't work. Blake not only became abusive, but she also got zero development through her dour, attitude-laden arc. The only scene that looks into developing her past and character only scratches the surface, and gives the audience next to nothing to work with. She doesn't have a climax to her arc, because there was no arc. She showed up to Menagerie being pissed and ended the volume still pissed and finally ready to do something. Every problem Blake has feels base level, with simple and obvious solutions. No room on the island? Don't waste space by living in a huge empty mansion then. Blake gets so little screen time that nothing gets done with her, and the only conflicts that arrive are started by Blake. Arguing with Sun? Blake started it, and that went nowhere. She just yelled at him and he just forgave her. Ilya fight? Blake's the one who ran after her. The fight has no build-up and has no effect on the volume, as Blake decides to take back the White Fang because of what Sun says to her, not the knowledge of White Fang's attack on Haven. Ruby's not the only one who's forgotten what their character used to be like. Blake's gone from quiet reader to loudly complaining. Sun used to be cool and confident, now he's just a joke. The shifts these characters have taken this volume feel like a regression, as if they're more shallow than they used to be. The whole cast is quickly transforming into tropes, rather than characters. Blake's motivations make no sense either. She ran off to protect her friends from getting hurt by the White Fang, so she goes to her family? Wouldn't that, put her family in danger? Blake's part feels like a chore to get through, with her preachy dialogue, lackluster animation, aimless plot, unnecessary abuse, and lack of progress. Yang's arc finishes in episode 4. Episode 3 established her unwillingness to put her new arm on, episode 4 has her put it on. Everything after that does nothing to further the plot or have Yang grow, feeling like her screen time from episode 9 and on is dedicated to setting up her next plot point. She either starts an arc or completes one. We never see her working through her development. Yang gets the least amount of screen time between the Ruby girls, despite the fact that she has the most potential to grow and has done the least of the girls so far. Yang finally gets an arc and it's over in 2 scenes. It feels like once Yang lost her arm, the writers didn't know what to do with her, so they just skipped her. Yang's also contradictory throughout her first 2 episodes. We see her getting on having learned how to live without an arm, but seems sad over her new disability. She complains about losing a part of her that's never coming back, but refuses to put her new arm on, for seemingly no reason except to pad out the runtime. It's as if the writers wrote Yang to be depressed in the beginning because that's what she should be doing, not to help the development of her character. Her PTSD goes about as far as Ruby's nightmares, and is dropped just as quickly. She grows, but with no build-up. Clearly Yang was depressed as an excuse for Ruby to leave without her, but once it came time to develop Yang out of her depression, the writers just had her get over it without any kind of work. Yang's screen time feels wasted, between unnecessary conversations and refusing to show the audience any of the actual growth Yang went through. Struggling to put the arm on? We only saw her complain about not having an arm. Learning to live with her new one? Just jump to the part where she's back to normal. The viewers wouldn't want to actually see her develop at all. Yang's arc is a disappointment, because there was so much potential that just got jumped over and ignored. I guess all the time we could have spent watching Yang grow was better spent towards Crow's too cool for school backstory, and... Asuka's arc this volume is the equivalent to the first episode of a different anime. Asuka doesn't grow, his story just begins. This is fine, as clearly the runtime was too crowded for Asuka to get any more development than he did. His scenes show us his character well, but they also tend to drag with their long-winded exposition dumps and uninteresting settings. It kinda feels like they put as little effort as possible into animating Asuka's parts. Everything moves pretty slow and he does little more than walk around while talking. It's nice that we come back to him regularly, never letting the audience forget about him, as he is important. Almost too important. Asuka feels like he should be the protagonist to a different shonen anime, similar to Naruto or something. This is kind of annoying since we not only already have 4 protagonists to follow, but half of them have barely gotten to develop over the runtime of the show. Not to mention how frequently we focus on other characters anyway. Team RWBY should be our heroes, but Asuka, Jean, and Crow all feel like honorary protagonists. But to get back on focus to Asuka's arc this volume, it's fine. It's a little slow, and is only the beginning to an actual arc, but it establishes him and his situation efficiently. It is annoying how his suspenders are glued to his shirt, though. First, I have a complaint that's been bothering me since Volume 1. I wish Ren and Nora weren't treated like one entity. It should be Ren and Nora, not Ren and Nora. When the volume first aired, my friends and I would say stuff like, Ren and Nora's backstory was so cool, or I'm glad we got to see Ren and Nora do so much. And it wasn't until I started doing these reviews that I realized that this was Ren's arc, not Ren and Nora's. Nora plays an important part in it, but it's Ren's story. Separating Ren and Nora in a way that they feel like their own characters, not like one half of one, would be really nice. That being said, Ren's arc is my favorite of the volume. It builds up regularly, and in an effective way. The intrigue that comes from seeing the hints of the Nukkalavi throughout the volume is super fun, and never feels sluggish. It's also the only arc that, actually concludes. It's a pretty weak conclusion, as the fight became too easily won at the end, but it does conclude. Conclusions are satisfying, so you'd think RT would have them happen more frequently. Ren not only grows from his experience, but we also got his backstory, and learned his character motivations. All in one of the best written and paced episodes of RWBY so far. My biggest problem with the arc is that it doesn't really start until episode 10. The build-up is fun, but the inciting incident happens when Ren and Nora find the Nukkalavi's cave. And even then, episode 11 pushes it aside, meaning there's only 2 episodes of the volume dedicated to the final conflict. It's good, but it just felt like it was established and over too quickly. Hopefully Ren and Nora find a way out of the background more frequently, and can become actual members of the party, rather than be the comic relief and wise advice givers forever. The audience was introduced to Salem's group really well. It didn't drag, and we quickly got a basic understanding of each member. Though, despite introducing so many new villains, they're pretty inactive this volume. Tyrion attacks Ranger, but beyond that, we get only 3 scenes with the bad guys. Checking in on the villains more regularly would have been a nice way to have them feel more involved with the story, or just having them do something in the few scenes they got. The villains haven't progressed their evil plans at all this volume, making all these cool new characters an afterthought. This group of baddies are really interesting, so let us see more of them. Why are Emerald and Mercury even here? All they do is speak for Cinder, once. They're not only wasted in the volume, but they feel unnecessary overall. Fennec, Corsic, and Ilya are pretty underwhelming. Ilya has a cool design, but we don't know anything about her until Volume 5 starts. The Albane brothers get almost no screen time, and they spend all that time expositing. The trio only seems to be here so Blake can have something resembling a conflict. People prefer a villain that we can get to know, so we can understand the motivations. These 3 are little more than basic concepts this volume. Jacques' a great villain. I don't like him, and I want to see him lose. It's also refreshing to have a villain that doesn't rely on combat to win, or smug-ass overconfidence. Jacques' not much of a threat, though. If RT can make me not only dislike Jacques, but also got me to fear him, then they'd have a real winner on their hands. Whitley, however, doesn't really hold up. I don't like Jacques because he's abusive and insulting. I don't like Whitley because he's an annoying little shit. Whitley's snarky attitude feels like an obnoxious little brother trying to act better than you, and it's just annoying. I want him to get punched because he's a pain to listen to, not because he's done something villainous or bad. If they could make Whitley an actual villain, and not just a condescending fuck, that'd be great. So, Raven's not a villain, at least not this volume. But there's something I need to say about her, and I couldn't figure out where else to put it. Tribe is not a synonym for bandits. Thanks to Volume 5, I've learned that Raven leads a gaggle of bandits. She calls it the Tribe. Those words do not mean the same thing, and should not be interchanged. When Raven said she was the leader of the tribe, I, like a reasonable person, assumed that meant she was effectively mayor of a small village-esque civilization. Because that's what a tribe is. A small civilization. Because RT doesn't seem to understand that tribe isn't just another word for bandits, their scripts made no sense until recently. The warrior guy at Shion had said that the town was attacked by bandits. Crow later mentions Shion when talking to Raven, but it hadn't made any sense why because they didn't establish that the tribe is the aforementioned bandits. Later, when Yang comes across a fork in the road, the sign reads Mistral and Kurayuri with bandits written over it. This is a literal physical representation of Yang's decision. Look for Ruby and Mistral, or your mom and her bandit tribe. But we still hadn't known that her tribe was also the bandits! And the Kurayuro sign is crossed out like the one Ranger found earlier, so some people thought that Ruby had written bandits on the sign. And like, who wrote bandits on the sign anyway? That doesn't make any sense. Bandits are mobile. They won't just stay there with a sign telling people about them. So yeah, tribe is not equal to bandits. They're boring. They're slow and uninteresting to look at. It's only fun to watch them if they mention a character we know, but most of the time they're just barely moving silhouettes. They're about as interesting to watch as Crow's brother story, but without any of the important information. Any information of worth to be garnered from a World of Remnant is immediately brought up in the next real episode, since the writers know not everyone watches the World of Remnants. You don't even get fun facts. If they offered tidbits for hardcore fans, then that'd be great, but they just explain a history and lore that the writers were clearly more interested in developing than their actual story for the volume. All this would be fine, you don't have to watch them, except that their schedule for release is ridiculously stupid. First of all, we weren't given a schedule for when we would get a World of Remnant rather than a real episode. Which means you waited a whole week to see how the plot developed just to be met with a 3-minute waste of time, where you would then have to wait another week to get to watch the show. But the biggest problem with this was where they decided to break up the flow of the volume. This is the episode list with the World of Remnants included. Episode 4, one of the more boring episodes of the volume, was sandwiched by the things. Meaning, once we finished all the setup in episode 3, it went World of Remnant boring episode, World of Remnant worst episode. 4 weeks of us waiting for the plot to start. Most egregiously, they had a World of Remnant between episodes 6 and 7, meaning they made us wait an extra week to get back to the Tyrion and Crow fight, and we already had to sit through 10 minutes of shit to actually get to the fight and punished. Why the fuck would they do that? Hype up the viewers for a fight just to disappoint them the next week with how the Schnee family works? We don't care! Let us see the fight, damn it! If they want to keep doing World of Remnants, then they need to do 2 things. 1, make them fun to watch and interesting to look at. 2, tell the viewers when they'll be released. No one works together. Everyone just runs up one at a time and waits for their friend to get pushed away before going in. The show is structured around teams. People aren't just in these groups of 4 for fun. RT needs to learn how to have the characters work together in a fight. Not only does it make more sense within the show, but it's more fun to watch. Which one's better? Seeing Team Ruby fighting alone in Volume 2's final episode? Or seeing them work together to take out Auburn? The latter, because it's fun seeing how these characters can use their unique weapons, semblances, and fighting styles together. Everyone also seems to forget that their weapons are multi-purpose. More often than not, Nora will just run up to an enemy with her hammer, rather than shoot it with her grenade launcher. Sun seems to have forgotten that his bow staff can become gunchucks, but it also seems he doesn't even like his weapon considering how often he chooses to fight without it. Tyrion uses his guns 3 different times, once again choosing to simply charge an opponent rather than shoot from a distance. Crow almost exclusively uses his sword, despite the fact that he not only has a pistol in the grip, but he's also apparently super good at using the scythe. Yeah, did you remember he has a scythe? 'Cause I sure didn't. Bullets have also become totally useless. Gunshots never seem to hurt anything, and are laughably easy to block. Not only does Tyrion block all of Ruby's bullets without even looking, but later Tyrion shoots at Ruby and she blocks all of his bullets effortlessly while she just happened to twirl Crescent Rose around. These firearms should not be so ineffective. They're guns. People should get shot sometimes and it should cause damage. This show is more than just swords and sorcery. It has guns. I feel like the Ruby crew could do well to learn that these characters are able to shoot at an enemy, not just run at them. These weapons can be used in interesting ways, not just these basic slash fests. There's also an over-reliance on speed. Not only do weapons lack any weight to them, but everyone moves at a supersonic pace while fighting. Not only does this negate what makes RWBY unique, if everyone's fast, no one is, but it means there's no variety during combat. Look at any fight Crow's been a part of. They denote the ability of the combatants by just having them zip around. Not everyone should be a speed-based fighter. The only fight we've seen that doesn't have the characters blasting around each other was the White trailer. The knight is big and has to move slow, but it was still a challenge. If a character uses big, heavy attacks, Nora for example should, then they need to move slower and cause more damage for every hit. That's the payoff between these two fighting styles. Fast characters can do a lot of small damage, slow characters can hit less frequently, but for maximum damage. The real kicker is that, even though everyone's supersonic speeding around, only heavy weapons seem effective. Ren's Stormflowers never seem to do any damage, whether he's shooting or slicing. Blake's Gamble Shroud is similarly ineffective most of the time. Rooster Teeth should not only study how to give some variety to characters' fighting styles, especially their speed, but also figure out how to let the lighter characters become effective in a fight too. They also don't seem to know what sniper rifles are for. Distance. RWBY frequently gets right up on an opponent to shoot them. Sniper rifles are at their maximum effective range when they're between 600 meters to 2,000 meters away. Give the girls some room to work with. Volume 4 is definitely not the worst volume of RWBY so far. The character models and animation look nice. Fights feel like they actually exist in the world, not over it. I liked getting to learn about Crow some more. I liked that we finally got some backstory for Ren. While the fights have some real problems RT needs to address, they are still fun to watch. Ranger vs. the Geist is a stress-free romp to show off the new engine they're using. Blake and Sun vs. the Sea Dragon is one of the coolest parts of the volume. The Tyrion fight suffers a lot from let's stop everything for no good reason syndrome, but beyond that it's exciting. The Knuckle Obby's the weakest fight, since it slows down to a crawl at the end. It's a real shame to end off the volume like that, when the other fights prove that RT can make them fun. Vocal performances were nothing special, but everyone aside from RWBY does a good enough job sounding believable. Every problem I had with the performances seems to have been due to how they were directed. But the volume does have some real flaws. The pacing's out of whack and inconsistent. The animation takes a dive halfway through the volume. Character motivations come and go depending on what the script wants. The animation doesn't always match the tone of the performance. Fights only seem to exist because the show needs them, not because the plot or characters let it happen naturally. We jump over the middle of every character arc, half the cast feels useless to the story, the other half has regressed into tropes. No one goes anywhere in the volume. It feels like nothing gets done because everyone's stuck in one place for the majority of their scenes. Weiss goes to the party but spends most of her screen time locked in her room. We never even get to see the outside of the manor. Blake had a boat ride but is then trapped at Menagerie. Even when she's out of her house, Menagerie all looks the same. Yang only ventures away from her and Ty's place in the last episode. Oscar is stapled to the farm. It's just so boring to look at. Ranger's the only one who gets to explore, but even then, every location they're in feels the same, especially once episode 6 happens and they become stuck in moody lighting. How is it that when the kids were restricted to being at school, their locations felt more varied than when they were actively adventuring across a kingdom? Changing out the locales keeps things from looking stagnant and makes it feel like the characters are progressing. It would also really benefit Rooster Teeth if they figured out that fighting scenes and character growth scenes do not need to be separate entities. RWBY feels like it's in two parts. Action part, and plot character growth lore part. That's not how this should work. The fights should be incorporated into character and plot progression without just stopping the fight to chat for a bit. Characters can grow from fights, and you don't need to interrupt the action to do so. So often it feels like the animators never interacted with the directors. I want Blake to feel tired and at the end of her rope, since she's avoiding the White Fang and other conflict during the scene of her finally opening up to her problems. So they animate her beating Sun and acting on the offensive and aggressively during their argument. I want this scene to lead up to a cliffhanger, where Weiss decides to run away from home by sneaking out that night through a secret doorway. So they bring attention to her open window, a much more viable means of escape. The fact that they can't figure out teamwork during fight scenes comes as no surprise, since it seems they can't even work together to make the show. It just feels like there's an overall lack of communication between animators, writers, and directors, as if Miles and Carey write up all the scripts and just throw them at the animators to do whatever they think is best. An impression I kept getting when I first watched the volume is that Miles and Carey had decided to figure out the lore and history of Remnant and focus their efforts into that, rather than the actual volume. World building is a good thing to have in a show, but it should not take precedent over the plot. I'm glad they finally figured out how this world works, but it seems to have come at the cost of a half-baked volume. Everything related to lore or history seems thought out, and most of the character arcs feel unfinished. You need to know your priorities for a volume and decide what's important to show the audience. If we don't need it, don't give it to us. The Two Brothers story feels like a boring waste of time that was only included because you liked it and worked real hard on it. You're the director, so what you say goes. We did not need to hear the story of two brothers. It made no impact on the plot or any of the character arcs for the volume. If it was going to become important in a later volume, then bring it up then. The RWBY crew needs to be able to give up these supplemental scenes when they become unnecessary, especially since it feels as though they had run out of time to make sure everything was a good quality by the end of the volume. Ditching useless scenes allows more time to either expand the characters or for the plot to progress. You only have 3.5 hours to tell this story. Superlative lore would do better to be cut and made into a World of Remnant, rather than wasting your animation efforts and the viewer's time. These are all problems the RWBY crew need to work on if they want anyone to take RWBY seriously. These problems were fine when it was just a web series, but RT totes RWBY as a real anime, which means now it has to follow the same standards as its peers. And when compared to other action anime like Cowboy Bebop, Fullmetal Alchemist, Dragon Ball, or One Punch Man, it just doesn't hold up. If RWBY didn't have the Rooster Teeth fanbase, then it would have been forgotten by now. I'd like to see RWBY improve, to be able to hold its own amongst the sea of anime it exists in. Volume 4 is not a bad volume. If I had to describe it in one word, it would be unfocused. Too many things are trying to happen all at once, and it results in a jumble. The amount of times I find myself complaining about the atrocious tone shifts this volume is unacceptable. I feel if every character's arc was played together, then they'd work fine. Like, watching all of Weiss's scenes, then watching all of Blake's scenes, etc. Perhaps the volume would have been better if RT had done that, foregoing the cliffhanger-riddled, unconnected scenes to instead give us a series of character-focused short stories. But it's no use speculating on what could have been better. We have to look at how it is now, and as it is, the volume's a mess. With cliché writing and tropey characters, I'm tempted to say Volume 4 is worse than Volume 1, and Volume 1 thought the Jean arc was a good idea. Volume 4 is more fun to watch if you have friends you can riff on it with. There's some really cool stuff, but there's also plenty of garbage. I think Rooster Teeth can use this volume as a good learning method. What worked? What didn't? Why? If they can learn from their mistakes, then Volume 4 can become the first step towards making a truly great show.